Welcome to Defn, episode 16. Here we are with Mr. Malcolm Sparks. Hello, Malcolm.
Yeah, hi, Ray. Hi, VJ.
Hello, welcome.
So it's Ray McDermott here from Belgium.
And I'm Vijay from Holland.
Where are you from, Malcolm?
I'm from London, and I'm currently in Milton Keynes, in the office.
Still working hard.
Working hard, working late, yeah.
On a Sunday.
You're doing some... Is this your open source day?
We still have about 400 conference beers from the XD16 conference, so it's a nice place to come on Sunday night. No, I'm joking. Okay. I'm never here. I only came here because I need to get away from the kids, because if we were at home, they would be coming in every 5 minutes. And anyway.
And we'll have more special guests on the show.
Yeah. Yeah. Very special.
All right, fantastic, cool. So Malcolm, let's just get stuck right in then. So what was the journey to enlightenment then? What were you doing before Clojure, and how did you get to the parens?
My road to Clojure. I was working on a Java project in a bank, and we were going to create something new, but we were working on this big distributed Java system using coherence. And I had a friend there who was using Groovy, and he was using Groovy to create a kind of REPL experience into this distributed system. And it was really, really good. And I thought, well, I'd love to have that level of interaction. And I was already playing around with a scheme called Cower and creating a build system with it. So I was really into getting back into Lisp, used Lisp back in the day, and getting back into it. And just wished there was a good Lisp on the JVM, and one came along. So I got into it first, and then as soon as there was an excuse to kind of write this REPL for a new distributed system, I said, yeah, we got to do this, but let's not use Groovy, let's use Clojure. And because it was only one little tiny thing, people said, yeah, that would be okay. And then we gradually wrote the web front end with it, and it wasn't too long before Clojure became, making inroads into the Java app. So there's more Clojure, less Java. And then we got a chance to write an application from scratch called Fandango, which was one of the, to meet one of the support problems in the bank. Mm-hmm. And we built it in about 2 weeks, and it went sort of live, kind of non-official live.
Yeah.
And it was very popular and very successful, and it's still running now. So that was a good experience about how you can create stuff pretty rapidly with Clojure, and it's pretty reliable.
But how did you, at that time you were working with the bank itself, or were you as a consultant, or? I
was working for the bank full time. Yeah, I was.
Okay,
yeah.
But how did you convince them to say, okay, I'm going to try to build something in a different language? Because usually banks are like one of those very hard to change, or the resistance to changes is very high.
Yeah, it was a combination of doing something that was non-critical, but doing something that absolutely couldn't be done in Java. We wanted to create, build a REPL on top of an existing Java system. So it had to be kind of something dynamic. And then comparing how quick it was to build websites in Clojure as opposed to Java. And then sort of a management thing where my manager left and went to join another team, and they needed some other manager. So I put my hand up and said, I'll be the manager.
Yeah.
And so
then you could set the direction.
Yeah, I was the only volunteer. So
and then it was all Excel sheets from there.
Yeah.
Instead of IDEs.
Yeah, there were upsides and downsides with that.
Okay.
So how long did you stick with the Clojure in the bank? Because I know that you and John were also. I think he was in a different bank, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was in a different bank. I stuck there it was about 3 years. I started doing some stuff in 2009. Got really serious in 2011. That was when we built this, this support system.
Yeah.
And then at the end of 2012, things were changing in the bank, and decided to move on. Got in touch with John. We started going to lunch every week to talk about Clojure in banks, and then one thing led to another, and we decided to start a company.
Excellent. So, and that company was JUXT, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, I was going to call it something like Simplect or something. John said, no, that's a rubbish name. We'll call it JUXT.
So that's a nice function, right? I mean, you have all these people as the first parameter, like changing code, and then you have a list of programs coming in, and then you convert them using Clojure, and then you get different set of programs. So that's a nice name for a Clojure company, at least.
Yeah, it's kind of a quirky function in Clojure company at Clojure Core, and we're a kind of quirky company.
Fantastic. So it was just you and John initially.
Yeah, well, it was. And
okay.
Initially, I went off and did worked for a startup, a job I would have got if just contracting really, but I decided to go through JUXT, and John picked up a contract at Mail Online, and was instrumental in in Mail Online's decision to refurbish their website in Clojure. And that was really kind of what got us really started, because everybody has heard of the Mail Online. So.
Yeah. So then what did you do then? You basically from those other beginnings, you just brought as you needed more people, JUXT added more people to the staff, or I guess with a blend of the company staff as well.
Well, we really got a break with an old colleague of John's who approached John and said, look, I really need you to get back into this property portal business, because we want to build a property portal. We've got to build it by in 10 months, and we've got nothing. And would you build us this thing? And John said, yeah, but I'm not going to build it in Java. I will only write it in Clojure, which is kind of a brave thing. And they went away, and I think a couple of weeks later they came back and said, well, okay, we've looked up Clojure, looks okay, go ahead. And so we built a team. John and I built a team together, and about 7 or 8 people, and started. Well, there were different individuals involved, but it got up to about 7 or 8 people, and that became onthemarket.com, which was built. And I wasn't too involved in it, but John and his team did a great job, and they delivered on time, and did an amazing job.
Yeah. Okay. And now you've got conferences and all this other stuff. So what's the state of JUXT at the moment? Yeah,
we've just released our first, I think it was a promo video that we got done, showing the XD16 conference. I think John put that up last week. So
we'll put a link to that then.
Yeah. That was our experiment into having our own conference, and we really enjoyed it. It was a good experience. It was a bit fraught. It was a lot of work. It was kind of one of those ideas that was really pub talk. Let's do our own conference, and that's a great idea.
We've been at conferences. Can't be that hard.
It's just getting people together, isn't it? I mean, that's it. So it was a lot of fun. We were very lucky. We had good weather. We had great food, great suppliers. We had a fantastic event organizer that really helped us. So we just sort of managed to wing it, and it went okay.
Cool. Maybe we should get into the more interesting stuff.
The more interesting stuff. This is already interesting, VJ.
That's why I said more. I added a qualifier there just to
Your
avoid.
brain is shitless, Malcolm. Now let's talk about the web
server. Company, etc. Let's talk about code now. Enough of this stuff.
Get all the fluffy stuff out the way.
Anyway, so let's talk about one of the major project, that open source framework / library that you released. So what is the motivation behind it, and how did it come out? I mean, how did you get to the idea? Because in Clojure web development, we have different kinds of, I don't say competing, but different kinds of libraries filling different niches, or like kind of community kind of settled down on composure driven stuff, or at least some of them, I think. So what was the primary reason or motivation? For Yada, of course.
Well, the primary motivation for Yada was that we were building on the market.com, and it was a review, I suppose, after we went live. And I sat down. I was talking to Martin Troyer, and he was very keen on ensuring that every web library has to be very defensive about what comes in, and there has to be good parameter validation and 400s, which is indicating to the client they made a validation error, and there has to be strong defenses against injection attacks and all that good stuff, which was already done in Funhouse, and I think some pedestal interceptors. And then we had somebody else on the project. Frankie was very keen on Swagger, and we had a bit of Swagger on the market that actually enabled the mobile app provider to access and see our APIs and document them. And then we had a bit of Ring and Composure and a bit of Biddy and a whole lot of different things, and Composure API too. And it was we had quite a lot of different moving parts, and it was an idea to consolidate. But at the same time, so that was one kind of checkbox, which was, let's have something that can do parameter validation. Let's have something that can do Swagger. And I was also trying to figure out how to make Liberator asynchronous. We had David Hume had contributed a pull request to Liberator maybe 6 months before that to make it all asynchronous. And I don't think Billy was able to accept the pull request for technical reasons. This was a kind of idea that we've been talking about, making an asynchronous Liberator. So it was an experiment to try and start again, because when you've got those three checkboxes, those three constraints, it's really hard to then build that on an existing library. So I just went and had a blank piece of paper, an empty namespace, and just started playing around, and very, very quickly discovered Manifold, which was Zach Tillman's asynchronous library, or kind of, it's a lowest common denominator library. It's a kind of interface that allows different asynchronous implementations to plug in together. So I very quickly discovered the deferred chain and started putting functions that could kind of link up asynchronously. And it was that discovery that really propelled, the direction of Yada.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, I think there was a lot of, I think at the time with async HTTP, there's a lot of motivation for that, isn't there? Because I think people look at Ring. I mean, Pedestal, I think, had some async stuff, but seemed to have lost its way a little bit, the Pedestal stuff. Because I don't know, the adoption rate wasn't very strong, some of the documentation. I don't know if the people didn't work on it hard enough, but there was a need for async stuff coming around from the web teams in Clojure, especially after Core Async was out and people were interested in Node.js and all the kind of memory footprint type things that Node was claiming, Nginx, so that whole model of like non-blocking HTTP servers was definitely catching fire, wasn't it?
Yeah, and Clojure was sort of late to the party, because we were waiting a long time and sort of saying, well, async doesn't matter. We were on the JVM. We've got lots of threads.
Yeah.
Martin Troyer, I have to credit again for kind of explaining to me and through his blogs about what async really meant and what it was and the advantages of it. So I was reading his blog one day and it kind of dawned on me. But to be fair to Pedestal, Pedestal came out before Core Async, and so then Core Async came out, and they had to refactor a lot, and I think that was still going on a couple of years ago, and it wasn't clear to me that they'd actually figured it out, or at least asynchronous interceptors is something you have to do explicitly in Pedestal. So you can do it, and you can do it through Core Async. But I wasn't aware of how you did it. I wasn't playing with Pedestal at the time. I was aware of it. I knew how it worked, but I was kind of, I wasn't trying to build on Pedestal.
Yeah. No, I wasn't trying to criticize Pedestal at all. I mean, I think for whatever reason it just didn't catch on. I don't know, I don't know.
Also the Pedestal at that time was also like a full batteries included sort of thing.
Right.
It has the front end as well and the back end. I think after we got enough of Clojure script React related things, Pedestal guys decided that there is no point in pursuing it as a part of the whole framework anymore. So that Pedestal became purely back-end framework.
Yeah.
So ditching all the front-end things. So I think the front-end was, well, I think it's one of the iterations of the ideas, isn't it? It's like you take an idea and then you iterate on it, and then new things come in, and then they build up on the lessons that we learned from the previous one.
Yeah.
So that's what my view from Pedestal is. Anyway, so coming back to Yada, so this when did you exactly start this project, by the way?
Yeah, it was 2 years ago. I think the first commit was about this time in 2 years time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is extracted from the code that you have written, or just the ideas that were taken from the work that you have done so far?
Yeah, I started from scratch.
Okay. So the patterns were there in different projects that you saw, these different patterns you applied for on the market.com and other places?
Yeah, it was very much a kind of retrospective on a number of projects, the primary one being the On the Market project, but other projects that we'd done with Liberator.
So one of the, I think, critical things in a web framework is essentially routing or routing. I don't know. Is it routing for British people?
It's routing, routing for
Routing.
Americans. Yeah.
Routing for Americans, yeah. Okay, well, screw it. I'm from a British colony, or ex-British colony.
Oh my God.
Let's not get there. But anyway, so let's call it routing. So can you give us some idea about how the routing works in Yada? I mean, how like the bidirectional routing, URL generation.
Yeah, I mean, there's no routing in Yada, and that was an explicit decision.
Yeah.
And I got that idea from Billy, who I spoke to at Berlin Clojure in 2013, and I was asking him, Billy, could you put, when are you going to put routing? Because every web library has a router. Why doesn't Liberator have a router? And he was very clear about the separation of concerns here, that a web resource is one thing, and the name or identity that a web resource has is another. And you shouldn't confuse the two. And if you want to simplify the web, you need to understand that these identifiers for resources are completely opaque strings. They don't actually have any meaning once you get beyond the scheme and the host and the port. The path is just a string. And so many web frameworks kind of get into looking at the path and breaking it up into segments and saying, well, this bit is some JSON resources, and this bit is some HTML resources, and this is some dynamic stuff. And they kind of, I don't want to use the word complete, so yeah, but they do that. They kind of oh no!
Oh God! He's imposing a vocabulary on everyone.
I think we need to check the Google Zeitgeist or something. They publish the trend of the words that are used on the web. So complex was 0 for some time, and then Clojure at one Clojure con, suddenly everybody keeps saying complex.
Right? You're not allowed to say it anymore.
Let's say it braided the things. I think braiding is allowed, isn't it?
Yeah.
Complex is a bullshit word, isn't it? Because no one's heard of it, but people have heard of mixing and mixing concerns, and I think that's really what he means. So screw complex, but we'll go with mixing concerns because that's what you're really talking about. So,
I should say that Billy had another kind of key contribution, which is, he said, if there was a routing library, it should be a separate library, and it should have this quality that it was bidirectional. Isomorphic,
of course.
And I completely agreed with that, because one of the things that is really common to writing websites is broken links, and you have tests to make sure, and people are always writing libraries to kind of string concatenate links together, and it's a thing that people do by hand, and they get it wrong, or the URIs change or something, and you get broken links. And that's one thing if you're human and you're trying to click on a link and you get a kind of page not found. But if you're a machine and you're trying to follow out some kind of financial transaction, then that's a complete disaster. So we felt it was necessary to do something much, much better in that area.
So do you want to just define what bidirectional means in that sense then? Because I think not everybody is familiar with that concept.
Yeah, so bidirectional means that you have the URI and some algorithm that can look at that URI and turn it into a handler. That's typically the routing aspect of it. And then there's another algorithm that will take the handler and generate the URI, which would target it. And that gives you a string. And now, of course, when we do routing, we have these things like parameters, which are, we might call them path parameters, which are kind of variables within the URI. And so when we generate a URI that has a parameter in it, we need to give the value of that parameter in order to generate the URI again. And the reason it's important is because when we create a web response, we might want to indicate to the browser all the other links, all the other web resources that we might want them to go to. And we'll maybe talk about that later, about that being a key aspect of REST. And if you can't do that very easily, then you don't bother. And if you don't bother, it's a shame.
Well, let's come on to that then, because we talk about REST and HTTP, and maybe there's this hypermedia as the engine of application state. And I know when we were talking at Clojure, you were very motivated by this concept in general. And I think a lot of people that are real HTTP nerds or geeks or aficionados like yourself are very sworn to this way of doing things, and yet for whatever reason, it's not very strongly adopted. So what can we say about that? What do we want to talk about with this benefit of REST? Because a lot of stuff we're doing these is not, according to most people, nothing is REST. Unless Roy Fielding says so, and he doesn't say it very often. So I guess he won't say that Yada is REST. I don't know. Who knows? It's a fucking one-armed bandit as to what he says. But what do you say?
Well, I know I'm trying to dig out a quote that I had from. Yeah. So there's a quote that I've got from Roy in one of his InfoQ interviews, and he said, "REST was originally created to solve my problem. How do I improve HTTP without breaking the web? It was an important problem to solve when I started rewriting the HTTP standard in 1994-95. So you've got all these people using the web, and HTTP 1.0, and they're having a great time. They've got surfing, and lots of people building apps and businesses and stuff on it. Yeah. And this guy's kind of tasked with writing the next version, HTTP 1.1.
Yeah.
And he's got this really difficult requirement. How do you not break everybody else's fun? How do can he turn off the web and get people to adopt the new one? And so he decided that wasn't palatable. So he came up with, I don't know if it was Roy, but I mean, I think a lot of, he would credit other people with these kind of ideas, but he distilled all these kind of things in his dissertation about how the web worked and how to keep it working. And so when Roy sort of talks about what is REST and what it isn't, what he's really getting at is how do you put services out there that don't break the web? And I think that's a really valuable thing to do at an application level. How do you evolve an application, not a huge system like the web? How do you evolve a service and keep all of your other clients, who may be other businesses, how do you keep them working without breaking them all the time? And that's something that we still struggle with in software, and we struggle with that locally, let alone globally. So I think it's a really important problem to solve.
But maybe so you can say it another way though. What is the actual problem? Because what's the problem with just putting out these APIs? Why isn't that a great enough answer? People are doing all these APIs. No one's crying. No one's breaking the web. So
yeah, what is the problem with soap? I don't understand.
Exactly. Yeah, come on.
Well, the problem.
Okay, don't troll him. No, but it doesn't really matter whether. I mean, one could argue that SOAP is a bit more annoying than JSON, but it doesn't seem like it's changed that much in that respect. You know. Well, I mean, it's just still it's just packets of stuff. One of which is slightly more amenable for us to read or to parse or whatever. But the fundamental concept is somewhat similar. But the problem with SOAP, of course, is that it was not verb based. It didn't use the HTTP contract. Is that what we're kind of talking about here? Is to reuse the web verbs?
I think we're talking about how brittle an interface is. If it's very sensitive to, like some SOAP contracts are very sensitive to the parameter types, and I mean, it's possible to evolve a SOAP interface in a binary compatible way, and we're going to get onto Rich's talk quite soon, aren't we?
Yeah, no.
There's a lot of echoes.
It's in the air, so why not? Yeah.
But I mean, these are really important ideas. And if you create a brittle interface, as people do, where they say, right, you've got to call this URI, and then you've got to call that URI, and then you call this URI for doing this and this action. As soon as you make a change, you break everything. And you say, right, now everybody, you've got to upgrade. Everyone's got to upgrade by Christmas, because I'm going to turn off the old version, and we're all going to move together as one to the next version. And the world just doesn't work like that, because everybody has different deadlines and release schedules and stuff. You can't just demand that everybody upgrades, and that is the problem.
Yeah.
But it's also the problem, again, maybe I'm misunderstanding the problem, but some of the problems were that, like, SOAP added a whole load of, like, imperative verbs. Like a lot of the stuff that you did in the contract in SOAP was essentially above and beyond the web itself. It kind of went over the top of the web and had its own language, essentially, to specify contracts. It didn't reuse the underlying infrastructure of HTTP, where REST seems to want to do that. So that seems to be a critical difference in my understanding anyway.
Yeah, I think another critical difference is that in SOAP, it isn't well defined what are mutable operations and what are mutable ones. At least my understanding of SOAP. I mean, you can do anything, and that thing that you do could be idempotent, or it could be it could be side effecting, could launch missiles, or it might be just getting the status of the missiles. And those separating reads from writes is really, really key, because if you do that, you can then cache your reads, and you can scale your reads out. If you know that you're dealing with immutable data, then that's very good knowledge for a cache to have, because then they know that data is still valid.
Well, isn't it the fact that, like, if you use REST, then you can use all of the, like, infrastructure of the web. So all of these kind of caches, if you set a not modified, or if you set an expiry date on a resource to be a long-term future thing, then all the kind of intermediary caches can look after it, and the browser knows about these things. Where in SOAP, it's an extra protocol, essentially. All of those kind of things are ignoring the fundamental, like, infrastructure of the internet, of the web. Sorry.
Yeah, I think so. In that people didn't write in hardware proxy servers and things that would have knowledge of SOAP built in. Maybe because I don't know enough about SOAP to know whether those qualities of knowing when something is mutable or immutable or idempotent. I don't know whether that's a thing in SOAP.
And also the primary thing with SOAP is that you have the SOAP with RPC. That means everything is a remote procedure call. So you're calling functions.
Yeah. And
SOAP happens to be that you can have SOAP via SMTP or I don't know any other protocol. And anyway, it's a stupid discussions to have now.
Well, I think the only interesting part about it is that, or as far as I'm concerned, the interesting thing about it is that this hypermedia as the engine of application state is really kind of the apotheosis of REST, and yet it's kind of seems to be a bit elusive at the moment. So, and we talked a little bit about that, about the fact that maybe people are, I don't know, fast food junkies. That they're, but it seems to me that I just put this in a discussion. There was a guy called, I mean, you probably know this already, guys, but there's Richardson's maturity model of REST. Mm-hmm. I don't know who this Richardson guy is actually, so maybe he's as you can tell me. But he is this bloke who says to everyone, "Oh yeah, okay, we've got this maturity thing," and I love the fact that the level 0, I think, is POX, which is plain old XML. POX is a great word for it, you know. But
especially for XML files so small.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, what I was going to say was that, like, there has these level 1, level 2, level 3 things, and as a colleague of mine starts to write these in the APIs now, and essentially judges people's APIs by their Richardson's maturity model. That strikes me as a bit harsh, but I don't know. What do you think about that, Malcolm? Because where are you supporting, or how are you evaluating those kind of things in JUXT or in Yada?
Well, one of the things that is making hypermedia elusive is, we talked about that, you know, the ease of generating links, because it is all about the links. So that's number one. So that's really something that we're trying to tackle with Biddy. Number two is that you have to have an agreement between the client and between the server about where those links are, or that the document has links, and if it has links, where are they? And you have to be a bit explicit about that. If you have a link in front of a human and you color it blue with an underline, they can see that it's a link and they can click on it. If you do the same for a machine, you've got to mark it. You've got to say this is the next chapter or the previous one, or you've got to have some convention about what next and previous means if you name your links. And those conventions are meant to be encoded in what's called a media type, which is a document which explains what the contract is. And it's meant to be a document that you publish, and you say, this is what media type is. This is the contract, version 1 of the contract. And then the clients then can code that contract. And so they can be looking for these names. So even if you change the URIs, then there's a degree of there's a degree of flexibility. Your API doesn't break just because you've changed the URIs, because you've kept those link names the same. So as long as you have that media type agreed, you can then evolve it to you can have a new media type called version 2 and version 3 and version 4. And what you're meant to do is then let the client and the server negotiate as to what version of the media type they've been coded against. So the server would typically it may support version 1 through version 4, or it may no longer support version 1, and a version 1 client would then not be serviced, or a client might be coded to version 3. And so they negotiate and say, oh, this is what I can read and this is what I can provide. And if they can come to an agreement and they say, right, this is what we're going to talk version 3. And then the server produces version 3 of the data, and the client then can read it because it's been coded by programmers who understand what the media type version 3 means. And so you need to have everything in place. You have to have pluggable media types, you have to have links, and you have to have content negotiation for all of that to work. And when you've got that, then you have the ability to version and move and evolve services without breaking anybody. And I think that is the holy grail.
But what about these? Because I mean, we looked at this with the media types, with things like Atom and stuff like that. Because obviously, I think most people would like to use standard media types if they possibly can. I mean, JSON API, for example, is a kind of media type where there are well-known links. What kind of, what other examples would you maybe cite as kind of like usable media types in the APIs in the kind of service interaction space?
I really don't know that many. I mean, I want to get into that area, but
right.
and perhaps I'm explaining what you might do, coming up with your own media types.
Right.
And I'm sure there are good initiatives to create reusable media types that others can use. But we're not just talking about JSON. We're talking about something beyond that. Yeah, to say, well, this is in JSON, but that's just the format. The media type might say, well, it happens to be in JSON, but it's actually a more specific declaration.
Yeah, well, I think the reason behind JSON API is just to sort of essentially assert some of these things. Is essentially to say, here are a bunch of, here's a media type, here is the kind of links it will provide, here is the kind of status codes we'll provide. So it's a kind, although it happens to be using JSON, fine, but there could be other APIs like that, and those RAML and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Like one of the, maybe it's a bit of a digression, but one of
Digress
the,
away.
Of course, I think that our entire podcast is a digression anyway. So when you're building REST API, so one of the biggest challenges is to design the API or the URI structure in such a way that you can reach all possible resources properly. And especially when you have an object graph as a model, then it is very difficult to specify at what level I want the data to be fetched. For example, if you see the Jira, the Jira bug management software, if they have some sort of a REST API, so they have a hierarchy of objects. They have projects and users, and projects has issues, and issue has more detail, blah, 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 something. So it has always been like a contention point when I'm designing such a REST API to decide how much data to return, and then how to give the control to the client to say, when you ask for a project, what kind of fields that you're interested in, let me know. And then we are going to respond with the appropriate nested data structure that they can use. Because otherwise, in just one query, they can get the entire data model. That's not going to be happy. That's not going to make their lives happy. And that the interesting development in that one was the GraphQL, right? So you give a query. So what is your opinion on this one? How do you solve this kind of problem? Do you think GraphQL is one of the way to solve this, or
so 2 points. Designing an API where you list all of the different URIs, that's frowned upon in REST. You're meant to go to the only URI you really ideally have to know is the root URI, and from that you get all the information about what's available and how to navigate it. And that means if you change your structure or you change your object graph, you're not going to break a whole ton of clients. The second thing is that, of course, a given URI can take query parameters. I mean, that's part of what a URI is. And URIs are designed to take queries. Google.com is a very good example. So there's nothing to stop you defining your query language in a media type and saying, if you send me a GET with this type of query string, I'm going to send you back stuff. And that's not really, people think, well, that's, REST is dead because query strings are useful. But, we know query strings are useful, and people should use them more.
Yeah. So it's not a competing thing, but it is complementing REST way of looking at the things.
Yeah, I think what it competes against is the practice of defining all of your different URIs that are reachable and providing those up front in a document, which is kind of what Swagger does.
The other one of those was from our good friends at IBM and SAP and Microsoft, wasn't it? The OData standard. They allowed you, in your query strings, they allowed you to filter the objects and to search for objects. So they gave you a kind of query language on the front end. But the problem with that was that actually it wasn't discoverable. The vocabulary wasn't discoverable. But I don't know how you... On the other hand, OData is a published standard, so you could discover it by reading the standard.
I mean, it's things either discoverable or they're written up in a document in a media type. And between those two things, you have rest. So I think as long as OData says this is the syntax and these are the things that you can query for, then that should be enough.
Yep.
Okay. Right, so we move on to. I think this has been a really good discussion of the various bits and pieces around that. What I was going to ask you about next was this something we're interested in, actually. It's kind of like this query thing, is the server-sent events aspect of Yada, and it's something which I've been playing with a little bit recently with Kafka, hooking up Kafka topics and then essentially publishing it out for given clients. And it was really weird because, I only found out about SSE, I don't know, maybe it's a year, 18 months ago. And yet they've been here around for quite a long time, sort of hiding in plain sight, this kind of model for notifying the clients. I don't know, you guys at Yada support them. Do you see a lot of use for them in your work, or is it still kind of coming?
No, I think SSC has been around for years and years and years.
Yeah,
it just hasn't, and it's been part of the HTML5 set of standards. And
it's an event source, yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of taken a backseat to WebSockets, because WebSockets used to have all the media attention, and people will use WebSockets for stuff. But then, of course, you have to reinvent your own security and cookies and all of the kind of security, like cross-origin resource sharing and all that sort of stuff that's been built on top of that safety net that's been built on top of HTTP. You then lose as soon as you upgrade to a different protocol. So people...
Yeah, that's just TCP/IP basically, isn't it?
Yeah, and people laboured under the kind of misapprehension that the only way of doing notification was WebSockets. But there's this kind of small thing, server-sent events, really simple, doesn't take up a lot of documentation to explain it. And now it's pretty much available everywhere. And even in old browsers, you can get polyfills that essentially give you that JavaScript event source. And then, of course, you get all of the benefits of the security and the cookie passing authorization. Headers are passed and that stuff. It's not perfect, but it does the job. And if you're not writing a game on the web, but you don't need that really, really low latency, then it's good enough. And I think it can make some really nice websites with interaction. And you see it everywhere. I mean, when you close an issue and push it on GitHub and you're looking at that issue, you can see it close in front of your eyes. It's a nice experience.
I think the difference is, if I'm not wrong, is that like WebSockets are bidirectional and SSE is unidirectional. In other words, it's just only from the server to the client.
Yeah, but you've already got the other direction because you've got post. So you don't
exactly.
need it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So screw you, WebSockets.
Don't do it.
Yeah, I think the security thing is pretty awesome. Talking of security, actually, this is something that I when I was reading the documentation of Yada, I found very interesting, which was that you say that security is part of the resource, not part of the URL.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's just
Don't
the way
say
that
no.
Well, I guess a lot of it is kind of post facto justification for the way things are, and I can't. But really, there's a lot in the HTTP specifications about security, multiple realms, and different authentication schemes and stuff, and it all applies to a given web resource. And the specs just assume you just have this one web resource, but of course they know you're going to have many. And the way that we group web resources in most web frameworks is we group them with a single URI scheme. And I guess that, what can I say? What do we say? Braids? Entangles.
Mixes it.
Mixes it. So you can only really have one hierarchy of security if you've welded it to your URI scheme, then you lose. You've got that instantly. You've got that parallel hierarchy. So security might be. It might be in certain circumstances that you want to create different types of groups, or you might want to do security based on not on the URI but on something about the user's credentials, or something about the the type of web resource it is. So I think any time that you look to create groups of resources simply through the URI, you lose the opportunity to create richer divisions and different categorization schemes and different hierarchies. So if we separate those two and say the URI is the URI, leave it alone, and then you define a different hierarchy for security. So we do this in Yada by you can tag resources and say this is private, or this can only be accessed by Frank, or whatever. You put that in the metadata, and then what I tend to use is Postwalk, which is Stuart Sierra's library in Clojure Core. And you can, once you've got all of your web resources in a data structure, you can then walk the tree and then look at every web resource in turn and say, oh, it's got this tag called Frank, or it's got this thing, and I'm going to then add in my security policy for that thing. So it gives you more flexibility, which may be valuable.
Yeah, because I think the classic one is where you have this URL that starts with /admin. You know, and what's the difference between the /admin view of a page and the normal user's view of a page? Actually, pretty zero.
Yeah.
Except you might want to sprinkle in a few menu items or something. But that's kind of annoying that essentially you have the same actual resource, you just have a slightly different view of it. And it shouldn't really be through the URL that you express that.
Oh, exactly. That might be you end up with a parallel hierarchy just because you need that bit being protected and that bit not being. And actually, the protection should be something about the client's credentials, not part of the URI, but part of the what request headers are being sent.
And that probably again comes back to how people make routing complicated, because they have this parallel hierarchy. Yeah. Okay, cool. What about other authentication schemes like OAuth 2 and stuff like that? Does Yada have support for those kind of things?
It does. It's quite hard to find, but it's in there. We use it on the website.
It's an exercise for the reader.
It is an exercise for the reader. Well, it's an exercise for me to document it, and I am, it is very high on my to-do list. People have asked about JWT and other authentication schemes. And JWT is part of OAuth 2. I mean, part of the implementation of OAuth 2, and Yada is using JWT. And OAuth 2 is quite easy. And we have it working. We have a login in our own website where we can log in with a Google credential or a GitHub credential.
Right.
And we just let if people are in the JUXT organization, they get a login automatically and they can log in with their GitHub. So that's much better than holding databases of passwords, right? So
All right, so I think we've done a good job there. I mean, I'm just wondering whether there's anything else in the current instance of Yada that we've missed, Malcolm, that you want to...
There's quite a lot more, but there is a lot in there, and partly that's because I'm really trying to implement all of the specification, regardless of whether people want it or not. So one of the things I'm working on is something called reactive negotiation. So when you do content negotiation, there's two types. There's proactive, which is where the client says, these are the kind of things I can deal with. And the server says, well, I just pick one, right? There you are. And reactive negotiation is when the client goes to the server and the server just sets out its stall and says, these are all the stuff I've got. These are all the different types of representations I've got for this resource. Which one do you want? And the client will say, oh, I'll have that one. And that's quite a nice, there's definitely, I can see some circumstances that would be useful. So I'd like to implement it. So there's thing on range requests and partials that I don't implement in Yada, and I'd like to. Not many people use range requests, but because it's in the spec, it's kind of fun to not really worry about the fact that people don't want it. I don't have anybody sitting at me. I don't have a manager with Yada telling me I've got to do this, got to do that. I just, the spec is my manager, really. And that's kind of
right.
and I'm invested in this for years. I want to carry on working on Yada for many years, and so it's one. Sometimes you say, well, I just don't have time to implement it all, but actually, we've all got forever. You just have to think in another dimension and just say, well, as long as I keep tapping away for the rest of time, then eventually I'm going to get around to it. So,
yeah. And are there other people working on it, Malcolm, or is it just a Malcolm Sparks labor of love, or have you got contributors adding stuff to Yada as well?
Well, not really invited, but there is 26 contributors in the project. So not a huge number, but there have been some amazing contributions that have. There was one contribution that improved performance in one aspect of Yada by 100 times, which was incredible. Wow. So, and there have been others like that, and there's been transit support added, and I should acknowledge all these people. I do try to acknowledge everybody who's kind of made major contributions on the README, and there's quite a long list.
Yeah. All right. Cool.
Okay, so we did something new for this show. Usually we don't pre-announce who, when we are recording, but we did this today, and we asked the internet to come up with questions, and to our surprise and merriment, we have at least three questions from different channels. So here is one. I really feel like we're like legitimate show now. It's like, okay, I'm gonna open our audience from South Africa, Mr. Robert Studderford, is asking.
Friend of the show.
Friend of the show. So anyway, so his question is, at JUXT, how do you hire Clojure developers? Do you train them up, or do you hire seasoned professionals, or if you train them, how does the training look like?
Hello, Rob. Well, what does the training look like? Yeah, we do both. So we hire seasoned pros if we've got projects ongoing and we need help. So we have a whole network of people that we can call upon, some of whom are available at any given time, and that's really great. And we've worked with them before, a lot of them, and we know. We do have quite a hard kind of vetting process for people that to join in existing projects, but we also take on new people who don't know Clojure and train them up by, we often, I think the first thing we do is put them on our website, and so our website is kind of the project where people can make their mistakes because it doesn't matter, or we can clean it up or stuff. So that's one way, and another one is to get them to to join either an internal project or a project where we do some projects where we deliver and develop the whole system, and they're ongoing. We support and maintain them, so we get people to maintain them for a period of time, and people pick up Clojure pretty quickly.
Okay, so speaking of your website, there is another question from Slack from Ann Monteiro. So he was asking, well, not exactly a question, but I'd love if the show touched a little on Malcolm's talk at Clojure in Finland, what they are doing with JUXT for their website.
Yeah. So at Clojure, I explained that we use this library called Skippy McSkipface in our library, in our website. And what Skippy does is there's a whole bunch of state in our website. There's markdown articles that we have for our blog. And there's config, and there's Clojure code, and there's some ASCII doc, and there's some HTML, and there's some SAS for CSS, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. And you can create a whole graph. And then what happens is when a request comes in, we check that graph is fresh. So that whole graph is in this derefable thing. The root of this graph is derefable. So when the request comes in, we deref that graph, and that freshens the whole lot. So if a file is then noticed as being, the date on a file looks like that it's changed, it's a blog article that somebody's edited, then the system knows that it has to reparse that markdown, and it might have to turn it into HTML. And that it might be that the title of the markdown has changed, the title of the blog article has changed, and so it then has to update the blog index. And so, it might have to change the menu page. And that bubbles up all the way to the top. So that's one part of it. And it means that every request comes in, they do quite a fast refresh, which is optimized. They then get a single view of state. It's a sort of, it's derefed, very much like you do in ClojureScript. You deref an atom and you get this kind of single view of state. We tried doing that on the server. And also we have another thing called push to deploy, where we push to a Git repository, which has it on our server, and it's a working tree that's expanded. And we do this little Git config thing where it updates the working tree. So because we're running the website on that working tree, then every time we push something, then it makes a live change to the website. So as soon as somebody visits the website, they might see a slight delay. And then there are these watchers that are looking for changes, and they're tied up to the Java 7 file watching service, so that they're being notified by the file system if anything has changed, so that they can, in the background, try and update this, freshen this big state graph. So that all of those concepts are there to try to build a system which is very much like a REPL, where you don't deploy it. Everything's deployed all the time. So it's continuously integrated all the time. There are no builds. You just make a change, and it's instantly visible. And so we develop on it as well. We have a beta website, and you can push stuff, and you get that REPL-like experience. ClojureScript too. We built our own ticketing system for X216, and we've got ClojureScript and payments and all kinds of stuff in the website. It's a really, really kind of like lots and lots of commits. Really old. We've had it right. The history of the website is the history of JUXT, and we've had it from day one. And it's one of those things with so much technical debt, but then so much refactoring and digging out of the technical debt. And it's a good experiment to see how mucky a Clojure project can get, and how much you can kind of clean it up and keep it going, which is really what most systems are. At the end of the day, you can't really keep out of technical debt. So it's an interesting experiment how good Clojure is at getting mucky.
Yeah.
So is it like you basically use like Git as the CMS?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you push, and then that's it. That's gone live. And that's why we have a beta. Of course, you can then unpush. You can always go back to a working commit.
Yeah. Okay, so final question from the community then. Sean Mahood from Slack. So he's asking, did you look, well, I'll just read the question. Question from Malcolm, has he looked at spec much? And if so, does he have any thoughts on how things would change in Yada if Yada were to replace schema with spec?
Yeah, I have had a look at spec, and I've been working on a branch for some time about how I would do Yada with spec rather than schema. And some things definitely do change. But I still like the aspect of Yada where you can write data structures that are in shorthand. We call this data macros, where you write them in a shorthand, and then they get expanded to what would be a canonical form, so that Yada only has to worry about one canonical form of the resource and not all these different variations. But the canonical form is a real pig to author, so it's nice to have these short forms. And I think that aspect of Yada will be replaced by something that will just do a tree walk with post walk and expand it that way and stay out of spec. I know there's conformers and stuff in spec. I try to emulate the same thing, but it gets difficult, and I don't want to braid the two ideas together. So, but yeah, there are quite a lot of things that I would like to put spec into. The request context, for example, doesn't have a schema behind it, and I'd like to define I'd like to get every interceptor to define what they need out of the resource, rather than having one big spec. Like I have one big schema for Yada at the moment, and it doesn't feel very modular. And I don't think it really accords to what Rich is saying about what spec should be used for. And I think spec is about declaring the requirements that you have as a piece of code on a structure, rather than pushing. It's really a pull-based thing rather than pushing. So I'd like each interceptor to say that these are the requirements that I have on the resource model, and for that alone to be enough. So there's quite a lot of experimentation to do, and I'm definitely not going to experiment in the master branch. So I'm just playing around, but definitely I want to figure out how to do it before I go live with it, and that might be sometime next year.
Okay.
I noticed as well that, like, when I was doing the resources, that you kind of provide, you're asked to provide a schema. You know, for each of the items. So, like, you've got ID1, ID2. They're both, you have to specify that they're both a string. So, is that an area where also, like, the the surface of Yada might change a little bit, whereas you could be asked to provide a spec rather than a schema?
Yeah, definitely. That's the other usage of schema, which is much more in the domain of. So I was just talking to my own internal use of schema in Yada. But yeah, of course, for all the Swagger properties and the Swagger spec generation, then that's all in schema right now. And Tommy Riemann and others in Metasyn and that community in Ring Swagger have definitely made big inroads in creating a spec version of that. And I was talking to Tommy a couple of months ago in Clojure about how that was going, and it's definitely possible. So that will, I'll have a look at that. But at the moment, I'm trying to clean up Yada a bit and separate the dependency graph. It's got a very big dependency graph at the moment, and it's much too big. So there's a lot of stuff like JSON and Swagger and stuff that are in the core, and I'd like to sort of tease Yada apart, make it kind of untangle a few things. So I'm doing a lot of cleanup. There's a lot of code in there that's sort of a bit old and needs a bit of a review. So I'm on quite a bit of a cleanup exercise and doing more documentation and trying to make Yada much easier for people to use. Looking at the code myself, there's bits of it that I just think needs some work. So onwards and forwards.
But if we were going to shout out to the community, then maybe documentation pull requests or other kind of cleanup pull requests might be welcome.
Well, actually, I find it's quite good just looking at what people are moaning about on Slack, and and that's often an indication of where Yada had a really busy year of development last year, and then this year I mostly tidied it up and got to 1.1, and then been playing with it and using it on projects and seeing how people have implemented it, and seeing kind of what has come out of the trenches and what people find difficult. And so I've kind of slowed down development and just sort of gone into listening mode and watching and seeing where things are happening. So I'm picking up on that, but I don't really feel the need to sort of ask people to write my documentation for me or that sort of thing. I think the level of community interaction and the raising issues and just being patient with me while I think about stuff. I'm still in the mode of having to try and solve a lot of the problems in parallel. So I'm not racing ahead, and so there's a lot of issues that I haven't touched and I know about, but I just haven't fixed, and I just kind of need the community to bear with me.
Well, I think we will for sure, because it's already a very, very useful and fantastic framework. I've done some stuff with it recently, and I was very impressed. So I think you've done a great job, Malcolm. So kudos to you. Hat tip.
Yeah.
But I think we should maybe start to wind it up a little bit, VJ. What do you think?
Yeah, of course. Thanks a lot to Malcolm, to you, to take the time on Sunday evening and walking all the way to your office and spending time with us. Before we wrap up the show, of course, we want to touch upon a couple of important things. First of all, as people in the Clojure community might have heard, Anthony Grimes, who is known as Rains or IO Rain on IRC, has passed away, which is a pretty sad news for the community.
Yeah.
I think he has been. I haven't met him, but I was on IRC most of the time when he was on IRC in the early days of Clojure, and he was also the guy who made Try Clojure, and he was also the one who made LazyBot on IRC, so you could actually try out Clojure code IRC bot. And when I heard the news, I was looking at all my Clojure code and grepping for Rains, io.rain.
Yeah.
There's plenty of libraries. I was just looking at the GitHub, and there are 45 Clojure projects that he made. Some of them probably everybody is using these days. So the code lives on, I think. It's a hard time, and there has been a GoFundMe campaign for helping out his family. And I think Chas Emmerich is leading a sort of a online memorial service or something for him.
I think the GoFundMe thing was very well supported. Actually, I had a look at it the other day, and so I think his family will be able to, because I think there was a problem getting him back home or something. So that should be covered, which is great. Yeah, great for the family, I think. But very early, very young man, and so it's it's very tragic for him and his family. That's for sure.
Yeah. So I mean, like every now and then, life gives you some sort of a perspective on what is important, So that's very heavy news. On the interesting, less heavy news, I would say. So we had Clojure Conj, and Clojure Conj videos are up. We are still going through the things. I think, Ray, you already started looking into the videos now a bit.
At a little bit. I mean, obviously, I think we probably all watched the Rich talk about versioning and being nice to clients and not. And basically, saying that Semver was flamed. Because if you have a minor or a patch version, well, nothing changes, so what's the point? If you have a major version, then you're basically an asshole, so don't do that. So that's my TLDR anyway.
Okay, I think one of the joke was Semver has a version. The semantic versioning has a versioning thing. I don't know what that means anymore, so it was interesting. But anyway, I think we'll go through the stuff. And the other interesting news is that the Datomic licensing model has changed, and there has been much merriment and joy in the community, I think. But there is no free Datomic licenses, or of course, if you can download Datomic and you get it for perpetually on the same version or something. So there are more details to it on the blog post by the guys.
I think it is free still. I think the only limitation was that the starter kit used to be renewable every year, but now they're limiting it to 1 year. The same. But otherwise, it's still an awesome thing. The thing I didn't realize as well is that they have a new client as well. It's only in alpha stage, but they have a new client library, which is meant to be a lot simpler to use than the peer library. So we'll see how that works out as well. But as far as the conj videos are concerned, I want to call out one more thing actually that I've watched, which was this proto REPL. That was goddamn phenomenal. This guy's done a really great job. We're just at the beginning of it now, but you can make a lot of very visual stuff. And he used another project that was in one of the talks called Said, which allows you to have tracing. And so it was very, very interesting how his work, and I can't remember the other guy's name unfortunately, but their work combined will give you a lot more visibility into your Clojure code and a lot more power when you're editing it as well. So although it's a REPL, it's actually built on Atom. So if you edit your Clojure in Atom, then you can kind of have this REPL, and it's very, very much more visually interactive than typical REPLs. So very, very interesting stuff. Okay. But I think, like you say, we'll probably pick up with more videos as we go through them in the coming weeks.
Yeah, of course, and we'll go through the videos, and we will update our audiences, and then help them in picking which videos they must watch and which videos they should watch. And well, that's the two categories. That's it. So, and of course, a couple of events that are coming up. So there is a Clojure D that is going to be in February, and the other event, which is I think much more.
Interesting.
Which has more gravitas in our, at least in our podcast, and as well as for me, it's a Dutch Clojure Day, which is going to happen in Amsterdam in March on the March 25th, 2017. We just started the necessary preparations. It's going to be a free event, just like the previous one. That means I'm going to spam everybody who says Clojure anywhere for sponsorships. So last time we did the same thing, because we want to make sure that this is a community driven event. So it's only by donations, by the sponsorship that we were able to pull off last time. And also Dutch Clojure Day 2016 was the reason why Defn podcast exists. So we started the discussion on 2016 when Ray was there. So who knows, this year you might have another podcast or something else, or we never know. And the call for proposals is open. So we'll put a link in the show notes. So please take a look at it and submit your talk. It's going to be another amazing day that we want to plan. And if you know anybody who wants to sponsor this event, let us know, or at least let me know. Tweet me up. I'd like to talk to you. That's it for the events, I think.
Yeah.
Anything else that we missed? No,
I don't think so. I think we just say thank you to Malcolm again.
Yeah.
Maybe just quickly
thank you, Malcolm,
say thank you to the people that help us produce the show as well.
Yes.
We have Pizzeri doing the intro outro music with his melon hamburger. So if you can look at his SoundCloud, that would be very good. We have the logo was produced by Lubov Sultan, and we provide some information about the work that she's doing. She's a freelance designer as well, so if you want some great work from her, then hit her up on Twitter. Yep. And we have a friend of mine, Wouter, who's helping with the mixing and fixing of the audio, so thank you very much. So
yeah. So those are the ragtag traveling thespians who help us. Basically.
All respect to those people, Vijay. Yeah. Oh Christ! I'll cut that out.
We can insult each other. That's fine.
All right.
Anyway,
let's stop. Malcolm, thank you very, very much. It was
a
really
much
awesome
for your time.
talk. Really fantastic. Thank you very much.
Enjoyed being here. Thank you.